The snow was falling over a forgotten town in Maine. On a broken bridge, an old man waited, not for help, but for the end. His home was gone, his hope burned to ashes. Then from the mist came a quiet figure, a war-hardened veteran and his loyal German shepherd. They didn't come to fight, but to protect. What followed would change everything, a battle not fought with bullets, but with courage, loyalty, and a heart that still believed in good. Because sometimes the bravest act is not pulling a trigger. It's rebuilding what was lost. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who still believes in kindness, and comment where you're watching from. Your words keep these stories alive. The wind over the Main River carried the bite of early winter, sharp enough to make breath visible, soft enough to whisper through the reeds. Snow had not yet fallen, but the sky was already a dull pewter, and the trees on the far shore were bare, their silhouettes black against the water. The bridge ahead was half collapsed, one side still standing like a wounded soldier refusing to yield. Jack Mercer walked with the kind of posture that came from years of discipline. Shoulders straight, stride measured, every step silent, even on gravel. He was in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, his hair close-cropped and already showing threads of gray. The lines around his eyes weren't just from age, but from the kind of vigilance that doesn't fade when the uniform comes off. A faint scar cut across his jaw, the souvenir of a night in Kandahar that still visited him in dreams. His clothes were practical, a weathered canvas jacket, dark jeans, boots worn smooth from miles, walked in silence. Beside him trotted Ranger, a German shepherd of 7 years. Large, muscular, his coat the color of burnished gold with a saddle of black across his back. His ears twitched at every sound, his tail moving low and steady. There was intelligence behind his amber eyes, the kind that had once read human fear as clearly as gunfire. Ranger had been trained to detect explosives and men who meant harm. These days, his mission was simpler: to keep Jack alive and to keep the nightmares at bay. Jack's truck had broken down 3 miles back. He didn't mind walking. The rhythm of footsteps and Ranger's quiet breathing was its own kind of meditation. He was headed to the small cabin he was restoring outside town, a place where silence might teach him to live again. He'd been out of the SEALs for almost 2 years, medically retired after a mission gone wrong in Yemen. The blast had killed 2 of his team, left him with a shoulder that ached every time it rained, and a hollow in his chest that no metal could fill. As he reached the midpoint of the broken bridge, Ranger stopped dead, ears pricking forward. Jack followed his gaze. On the far side, under the flickering light of a broken street lamp, 3 men were circling an older figure. The man, or what looked like one under layers of ragged coats, was hunched over a rusted shopping cart piled with scrap wood and old blankets. One of the men, tall and gaunt with a shaved head and a tattoo of a serpent around his neck, shoved the cart, sending it rattling into the guardrail. The others laughed. Their voices carried over the water, the kind of laughter that wasn't about humor, but about power. "Look what we got here, boys," the tall one jeered. "The old carpenter of the dock's still alive. Should have burned with your workshop, huh, Henry?" Jack's jaw clenched. He hadn't heard the name before, but he didn't need to. He knew cruelty when he saw it. The old man, Henry Cole, was somewhere past 70, though hardship had carved deeper lines than time alone could. His beard was long and streaked with yellow, his hands trembling but not weak. His eyes, pale blue, washed out like ice, burned with stubbornness even as fear tightened his mouth. He tried to steady the cart, shielding it with his thin frame. "I told you," Henry's voice cracked. "I got nothing left you want. Leave me be." The man with the tattoo snorted and threw an empty beer bottle. It shattered near Henry's boot. Jack's pulse slowed, as it always did before action. He didn't think in words. The training lived in his muscles. His hand moved automatically to rest on Ranger's head. The dog's body stiffened, ready. "Stay," Jack murmured. He stepped forward into the light. "Hey!" The men turned. The tallest one sneered. "Evening, Grandpa! You lost!" Jack kept walking until he was close enough to smell their cheap whiskey. He stopped 2 paces away, hands loose at his sides. "You've had your fun," he said quietly. "Now, walk away." The gaunt one laughed and looked at his friends. "What's this hero complex? You gonna save the old man?" Behind Jack, Ranger growled, a low, resonant sound that rolled across the bridge like thunder. The 3 men froze. Ranger's teeth flashed in the light, saliva glinting. His hackles rose, and his stance widened, muscles coiled. The tattooed man's smirk faltered. "That's not a pet," one of them muttered. "No," Jack said softly. "He's not." For a few tense seconds, no one moved. Then the leader spat to the side. "Screw this," he muttered. "Come on!" He shoved his hands into his pockets and walked off into the dark. The others followed, throwing nervous glances over their shoulders. Jack waited until their footsteps faded before exhaling. Ranger stayed alert until Jack gave a small nod. He turned to the old man. Henry was still gripping the handle of his cart, his breath visible in the cold. "You all right, sir?" Jack asked. Henry looked at him suspiciously. "People don't just walk into fights they don't belong to." "Wasn't a fight," Jack said. "Just noise." Henry studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "Name's Henry," he said finally. "Used to build boats down by the docks, before they decided honest work wasn't worth much anymore." Jack glanced at the cart. Among the junk was a folded wooden frame carved with delicate inlays, too fine to have been scavenged. "You built that?" Henry followed his gaze and almost smiled. "Old habit. Keeps the hands from freezing." "You got somewhere to stay?" Henry laughed bitterly. "If you count the space under the bridge." Jack hesitated. He didn't take people in, not since the war. But leaving an old man out here felt wrong, and Ranger had already moved closer, sniffing Henry's coat, and then sitting down beside him as if he'd made up his mind. "There's a cabin a mile from here," Jack said. "It's dry, firewood. You can rest tonight." Henry eyed him warily. "You some kind of cop?" Jack shook his head. "Used to be a soldier." "Soldiers and cops," Henry muttered, "both think the world's theirs to fix." Jack didn't argue. He simply took hold of the cart handle and started pushing it. After a pause, Henry sighed and followed. Ranger trotted ahead, tail low, leading them off the bridge and down the dirt path through the pines. The cabin stood where the trees thinned out, its roof half repaired, a tarp stretched across the rafters. Inside, the air smelled of sawdust and ash. A small stove burned low, throwing amber light across the rough planked floor. Henry sat heavily in the old chair near the fire, his joints cracking like kindling. "You live alone out here?" "Yeah," Jack said, tossing a few logs into the stove. "I like the quiet." "Quiet's only good if you don't got ghosts," Henry murmured. Jack didn't answer. He knelt beside Ranger, unhooking the leash. The dog stretched out near the fire, sighing in contentment. After a while, Henry spoke again. "Those boys, Dock rats, they call themselves, used to collect protection fees from the shops by the waterfront. I refused once, long ago. They burned my workshop down with my son's tools still inside. His voice thinned to a whisper. I walked out of the smoke, but the life I had didn't. Jack looked at him, at the way the firelight deepened the creases on his face. You told the police? Henry gave a short, humorless laugh. Half the department drank with them. The rest just looked away. He glanced at Ranger. Funny, ain't it? The only ones who still protect are the ones they trained to fight wars. Jack poured water into an old kettle. Some wars never end, he said quietly. Henry watched him for a moment. You don't talk much, do you? Not unless it matters. The kettle began to hiss softly. Jack poured 2 cups of black coffee and handed one over. Henry took it, his fingers shaking slightly from the cold. You think they'll come back? Henry asked. They will, Jack said. Men like that don't like being embarrassed, but if they do, they'll find we're not easy prey. Henry nodded slowly, as if absorbing not just the words, but the calm certainty in Jack's tone. Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching toward the door, then relaxed again. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the loose shingles on the roof. Inside, the fire snapped and hissed. The 2 men sat in silence, the old soldier and the forgotten craftsman, each nursing his scars in the quiet company of the other. For the first time in a long while, Jack didn't feel completely alone. The morning came gray and brittle, the kind that smelled faintly of pine resin and cold metal. Frost clung to the windows of Jack's cabin, and the river beyond the trees gleamed like a ribbon of glass. Smoke from the wood stove curled lazily through a hole in the patched roof. Inside, the air was warmer but heavy with silence, the sort of silence that followed men who had both survived too much and spoken too little about it. Henry Cole sat near the stove, his rough hands turning a piece of scrap wood in slow, thoughtful circles. Without his hat, his thin hair was almost white, his scalp lined with old scars from some forgotten accident. His clothes hung loose, patched in places where fire or time had chewed through them. But beneath the grime and age, there was something precise about him, the careful patience of a craftsman who once made things meant to last. His eyes, though faded, had the same blue-gray clarity as the winter sky outside. Jack Mercer, standing by the door, was already at work. He'd stacked lumber salvaged from a fallen shed nearby and had spread out tools on a tarp, a hammer, saw, and a box of nails still wrapped in Army-issue plastic. He had planned to rebuild part of the cabin that week anyway, but now he'd do it faster. He moved with quiet efficiency, his breath puffing white, Ranger pacing beside him with a soldier's rhythm. The dog's breath steamed in the cold, ears flicking toward every noise, the croak of a distant raven, the snap of frozen twigs underfoot. Henry watched the younger man through the open doorway. "You work like someone who doesn't know how to stop," he said. Jack glanced back, a small half-smile tugging at his lips. "Stops are hard to trust," he replied, then went back to hammering. After breakfast, black coffee, dry biscuits, and a piece of smoked meat from Jack's pack, they began rebuilding a small lean-to near the cabin. Henry's movements were stiff at first, but once he held a plane and a saw, his hands remembered their language. He measured twice, cut once, muttering softly to himself. The rhythm steadied him. "You used to build boats," Jack said between strokes of the hammer. "Yeah," Henry murmured. "Boats, furniture, anything with wood that had a story. I liked seeing something stand straight after I worked on it. Makes a man feel useful." He paused, wiping his forehead with the back of his wrist. "These hands, though, they're not what they used to be." Jack didn't answer. He knew too well what it meant when hands no longer obeyed the man they belonged to. By noon, a pale sun broke through the clouds. Ranger dozed in the snow near the tree line, occasionally lifting his head to scan the woods. The lean-to stood half-finished, its frame solid and square. Jack stepped back to admire it, brushing sawdust from his jacket. "Not bad for two broken men," he said. Henry chuckled, a sound that cracked like old wood but held a trace of warmth. One broken, one just trying to stay that way. As they cleaned up, Jack noticed a small metal box half buried under a pile of scorched planks near the old tool chest. He picked it up. It was dented, soot-blackened, the clasp melted. Inside was a notebook, the edges crisped and dark. The cover warped, but still legible. "What's this?" Jack asked, handing it over. Henry stiffened. For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Fear, regret, and a tired acceptance all at once. He opened the notebook with trembling fingers. Inside, the pages were filled with neat, cramped handwriting, names, dates, sums of money, brief notes written in a carpenter's pencil. "It's from the shop," Henry said quietly. "The year before they burned it. Every man who came for protection money. Every officer who looked the other way." Jack flipped a few pages, recognizing the pattern instantly. The methodical documentation of corruption. "This is a ledger," he said. "It's proof," Henry corrected. "Proof that no one ever wanted. I kept it because my son, he said it might matter one day." His voice faltered. "He was in the shop that night. He thought I'd gone to get help. By the time I came back, the fire was everywhere." The old man's breath shook. "Afterward, I told myself keeping this book was the only way to make it mean something, but all it's done is make me a target." Jack closed the notebook carefully, his gloved hand covering the scorched cover. "They still want it." Henry nodded. "The dock rats never forget what can bury them." Jack set the book on the table, next to a lantern. "Then we'll make sure it doesn't get lost again." Henry frowned. "You plan on turning it in? The cops are in their pocket." Jack looked out the window. The forest outside was beginning to darken. "There are ways to make truth louder than money," he said. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sounds were the popping of wood in the stove and the distant call of crows. Later that afternoon, as Jack fixed the door hinges, a pickup truck rattled down the distant road, a sound out of place in that forgotten corner of Maine. Ranger's head shot up. Jack peered through the window just in time to see the dust cloud fade. "Delivery truck from town," Henry said, though his tone wasn't certain. Jack's instincts prickled. "No one knows we're here," he muttered. When the sound disappeared, he forced himself to relax, though his hand stayed near the knife sheathed on his hip. Ranger's fur slowly flattened. Henry caught the motion and sighed. "You live like it's still war," the old man said softly. Jack gave a faint smile. "That's the trick, Henry. The war doesn't stop. It just changes address." That evening, as dusk settled, Henry cooked a thin stew from potatoes and beans, stirring it with a handmade wooden spoon. He moved slower now, his back hunched, but there was peace in his eyes, the calm of a man doing something that once gave him purpose. "You ever think of leaving Maine?" Jack asked suddenly. "Where would I go?" Henry said. Every place has ghosts. Might as well stay where mine know the way home. Jack understood that. He'd tried running once. To the deserts, the seas, the places where noise could drown memory. It hadn't worked. After dinner, Henry dozed by the stove. Jack sat on the porch steps with Ranger at his side, the night air sharp and filled with the scent of pine and smoke. The dog rested his head on Jack's boot, eyes half-lidded but alert. "You feel it too, don't you, boy?" Jack whispered. "Something's moving out there." Ranger's ears twitched in agreement. The stars came out slowly, scattered and dim through the haze. Jack thought about the notebook inside, the names it carried, men who believed the world would forget. He knew what that kind of darkness could do to a town. He'd seen it overseas when power turned neighbors into enemies, and he knew the price of staying silent. When he finally went back inside, Henry stirred awake. "You ever get tired of fighting, son?" the old man asked sleepily. Jack paused at the doorway. "Every day," he said, "but some things deserve it." He picked up the notebook and slid it into a small lockbox under the floorboards, beneath a loose plank he'd installed himself. Then he poured a little water over the fire until it dimmed to embers. Ranger settled near Henry's chair, his head resting across the old man's worn boots. Henry smiled faintly in his sleep, one hand unconsciously reaching down to pat the dog's fur. Outside, unseen among the trees, a cigarette tip flared red and died. The faint crunch of snow under boots echoed once, then faded into the woods. Jack didn't see it. Not yet. But the feeling in his chest returned, the one he thought he'd left behind with the uniform, the knowledge that peace was always borrowed time. The storm came in whispers first, a slow hiss through the pines, a faint crackle on the tin roof, before the sky turned to white and swallowed the world whole. The cabin lay half-buried under the snowfall, its faint glow a fragile heartbeat against the cold. Inside, the fire burned low, crackling beneath the hiss of wind slipping through the seams of the walls. Jack Mercer woke before midnight, as he always did when silence felt wrong. His instincts stirred first, the same primal radar that had saved him more than once overseas. He sat up on the cot, his breath a mist, listening. Ranger's ears were already up, his muscles taut under his tan and a black coat. The dog didn't bark, he never did unless commanded, but his quiet growl vibrated like a string pulled too tight. Jack swung his legs over the side of the bed and reached for his jacket and sidearm. The movement was smooth, practiced, as though 2 years of retirement hadn't dulled him at all. He crossed to the small window. Snow drifted like ash outside, soft but relentless. For a moment, nothing stirred. Then, through the curtain of flakes, he saw it, a faint orange flicker where there should have been only white. "Fire," he murmured, voice flat. He turned, and Henry was already sitting up in the chair by the stove, half awake, half dreaming. "What?" the old man rasped, rubbing his eyes. His beard glistened with frost where he'd dozed too close to the draft. "Get your coat, now." When Henry saw the reflection of flame in the glass, his face went pale. "Dear God!" Ranger barked once, sharp, urgent. The sound was answered a heartbeat later by a crash, the back window exploding inward as something hit it. A bottle rolled across the floor, flame licking from its mouth. The Molotov caught instantly on the ragged curtain. Jack didn't think. He grabbed the blanket from his cot, smothered the flames, then hauled Henry toward the door. "Out! Move!" The heat rose fast, licking the wooden beams. Smoke curled thick and black. Jack forced the door open, snow pouring in, and shoved Henry out first. Ranger followed, tail low, ears pinned. The three stumbled into the blizzard, half blinded by snow and firelight. Behind them, the cabin roared like a dying beast, sparks shooting upward into the dark. "Keep moving!" Jack shouted over the wind. "Into the trees!" Henry coughed, clutching the handle of a small wooden chest that had been sitting near the door, a rickety thing, carved by hand, now half open, spilling out photographs, blackened by heat. "My family," he wheezed. "Jack, wait." But before he could finish, the chest slipped from his trembling fingers and rolled back toward the flames. Ranger reacted before either man could. With a guttural bark, he bounded through the snow, teeth bared, and seized the corner of the chest in his jaws. His fur singed from the heat, but he dragged the heavy box clear of the threshold, snow hissing as it met the embers. Jack grabbed the other end and pulled it to safety, while Henry sank to his knees in the snow, tears mixing with the sleet. When they finally stopped, panting, 50 yards into the woods, the cabin was a pillar of fire. The flames lit the falling snow in shades of orange and gold, turning the night into a flickering nightmare. Jack stood beside Henry, his jaw tight, eyes reflecting the inferno. "They'll think we're dead," he said quietly. Henry looked at him, his face illuminated by firelight. Each line deepened with grief. "Maybe that'd be easier." Jack's tone was steady, but beneath it was steel. "No, you've been running long enough." He crouched beside Ranger, rubbing the dog's ears. The animal's eyes glowed amber in the reflected light, calm and fierce. "You did good, boy," Jack whispered. "We've lived through worse deserts than this. Now we survive at home." The snow buried their footprints within minutes. When the cabin collapsed, the sound was muffled by the wind, as if the forest itself wanted to hide what had happened. By dawn, the fire had reduced the clearing to smoldering ruin. The storm had passed, leaving the air brittle and clean. Henry sat near the riverbank, wrapped in Jack's spare coat, shivering, his breath shallow. The chest sat beside him, its lock broken, its contents scattered, a few photographs, a burnt medal, a folded letter still intact. Jack approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee he'd brewed over a makeshift campfire. He handed one to Henry. "Drink. You need to stay warm." Henry took it, hands trembling. "It's gone again," he said after a long silence. "Every time I try to start over, it burns." Jack crouched beside him. "Then we stop starting over. We finish it instead." Henry looked up, puzzled. "They wanted you gone because of what you know," Jack said, nodding toward the chest. "That ledger you kept, it's not just evidence. It's leverage. We use it." "Against them?" "Against all of them," Jack said simply. "But first, I need to know where they keep their operations." Henry hesitated. "Down by the docks, warehouse number 3. That's where they store the shipments they don't want customs to see." He looked at Jack, fear flickering behind his eyes. "You're not planning to go down there alone, are you?" Jack's faint grin was humorless. "Not alone?" He glanced at Ranger. That afternoon, they scouted from the ridge, overlooking the waterfront. The river had begun to freeze, thin sheets of ice drifting between the piers. From their vantage point, they could see the cluster of corrugated metal warehouses, the chain-link fence, the dim glow of halogen lamps cutting through the mist. 2 men in thick jackets smoked by the gate. Jack studied them through a pair of old binoculars. One was tall and heavy-set, his hair cropped close, a jagged scar cutting across his cheek. The other was younger, twitchy, his nose red from cold or drugs. They looked bored, but alert. "That's them," Henry said, his voice bitter. "The dock rats, run by a man named Bobby Kane. Used to work security before he figured crime paid better. Mean son of a gun, keeps a switchblade behind his belt." Jack's expression hardened. "Good to know." As night fell again, he began setting up the traps. Small motion sensors wired to his camera phone camouflaged near the fence. Ranger moved like a shadow beside him, nose low, paws silent. The dog was in his element again, the years of training reawakening with each command. By the time they finished, the cold had turned sharp enough to sting. Jack crouched behind a pile of crates, adjusting the final sensor. "That should do it," he muttered. "We'll have eyes on the place by morning." Henry stood nearby, wrapped in a thick blanket. "You're not just protecting me anymore, are you?" he asked quietly. Jack looked at him. "No, I'm protecting what's right. You just happen to be part of it." Henry nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure we both live long enough to see it." When they returned to the woods, the night was eerily still. Ranger kept glancing over his shoulder, ears twitching. Jack noticed it too, the faint crunch of snow somewhere behind them, gone before he could pinpoint it. He stopped, hand on his knife. "Keep walking," he said softly. "If someone's there, they'll show their hand soon enough." Back at camp, Jack wrote notes in a small waterproof pad. Times, patrol rotations, weak points in the fence. Henry watched him from across the fire. "You're planning something big." Jack didn't look up. "Just planning to survive the next round." The old man studied him, the flames reflecting in his tired eyes. "You could have walked away when you found me, you know." "I could have," Jack said, closing the notebook. "But I've seen what happens when good men walk away." Ranger shifted closer, laying his massive head on Jack's knee. Outside their small campfire circle, the snow began again, light but unending. The forest was silent save for the hiss of falling flakes. Jack looked into the dark, where the faintest orange glow still marked the ruins of his cabin. "They started a fire," he murmured. "Now we light one back." And in that moment, under the ghostly shimmer of snow, his plan began to take shape, a quiet war born not of vengeance, but of justice, long overdue. The dock slept beneath a shroud of fog and frost, the air thick with the smell of salt, rust, and gasoline. It was close to midnight. The river was still, its black surface broken only by the slow movement of drifting ice. Warehouse number 3 stood at the far end of the pier, a squat corrugated structure streaked with soot and graffiti, its windows boarded and its metal door chained from the inside. The perfect den for men who had never learned to fear the dark. Jack Mercer crouched on the roof of an abandoned fishery across the street, his breath ghosting through the cold. He wore a black field jacket, the same kind he used to wear on night ops, sleeves rolled tight around his wrists. The faint scar under his right eye glinted when the streetlight flickered. Beside him lay Ranger, the German shepherd, motionless as stone, his amber eyes tracking movement in the distance. Snow clung to his fur, but he didn't seem to feel it. Through the scope of his binoculars, Jack watched 3 figures approach the warehouse gate. The first, Bobby Kane, walked with the arrogance of a man who'd ruled through fear too long to imagine losing it. He was in his early 40s, thick-necked, his face cut by old fights and arrogance. A jagged scar traced from his left temple down past his cheek, pulling his lip into a permanent sneer. He wore a long brown coat that looked stolen, and his gloves were the kind of leather that came from someone else's paycheck. Behind him lumbered Gordy Briggs, his lieutenant, a bear of a man with a patchy beard and one blind eye that caught the light like silver glass. The third was a new recruit, Tommy Vicks, maybe 20, skinny, pale, still flinching at every sound. His nervous glances betrayed the youth still buried under the swagger. Jack's earpiece hummed softly, the feed from one of the small motion cameras he'd planted earlier. He tapped his wrist monitor. Every red dot blinked steady. "They're all home," he whispered. Ranger's ears flicked in response. Below, the dock rats pried open the padlock, stepping into the warehouse. Bobby barked orders. "Check the crates. I want everything ready before sunrise. If the old man's alive, he won't be for long." Jack's jaw tightened. He had waited for this moment since the night of the fire. The rage was there, coiled deep, but what steadied him was not vengeance. It was the thought of Henry's trembling hands on that burned chest and the dog's singed fur. Justice, he told himself, not revenge. He slid the flashbangs from his pouch, checked his watch. 2 minutes. Ranger tensed, nose twitching. Jack gave a hand signal, a silent go. The dog leapt down first, landing softly in the snow behind a stack of pallets. Jack followed, rolling through the drift, rising into a crouch. The night swallowed them whole. Inside the warehouse, the men had turned on the generator. The hum vibrated through the metal walls, masking the faint whine of Jack's boots as he moved along the catwalk above. The flickering floodlights illuminated the interior. Rows of crates marked with false shipping labels, tarps covering unregistered weapons and smuggled electronics. Bobby stood in the center, pacing. "This town thinks we're just dock rats," he said, grinning. "But rats survive, always have, always will." Jack reached the switchboard and pulled a small black flare from his pocket. He struck it, then dropped it into a nearby oil drum. The flare ignited in a burst of red smoke that filled the air, thick and choking. Lights wavered. "What the—" Gordy cursed. Then came the flashbang. The explosion wasn't lethal, just blinding, deafening. The men shouted, stumbling in confusion. In the chaos, Ranger moved. He darted from the shadows, low and fast, knocking Tommy's weapon aside with his shoulder and barking once, a sound sharp enough to freeze blood. Jack descended the stairs 2 at a time. The world turned red under the flare. He disarmed Gordy with a strike to the wrist, the man's pistol clattering away. The second blow drove him to his knees. Jack didn't kill. He incapacitated, efficient and cold. Bobby, half-blind from the flash, drew his revolver and fired wildly. The shot whistled past Jack's shoulder, hitting a crate. Ranger lunged, jaws locking around Bobby's gun arm. The man screamed as he went down, his weapon spinning into the dark. Jack crossed the floor, grabbing Bobby by the collar, slamming him against a support beam. The flare's light burned across both their faces, the soldier's calm, the thug's fear. "You burned an old man's home," Jack said, voice low. "You stole from the weak, hid behind uniforms and smoke. Now you tell me, who paid you to keep the police quiet?" Bobby spat blood, trembling. "You wouldn't—" Jack raised a small body camera, the lens glowing red. "Say it on record, or the next thing this footage captures is every dirty secret your friends buried." Something in Bobby's face broke. "It was Deputy Marshal Harlan," he gasped. "He takes a cut from every shipment. He said to finish the old man before he talked." Jack's expression didn't change. "And now you're going to finish this properly." He pressed the record button again, shoving the man toward the center of the floor. "Say it loud." Bobby obeyed. His voice, rough and broken, echoed through the rafters. Outside, a single police siren wailed, distant but closing fast. Jack slipped the memory card from his camera into a waterproof case, clipped it to Ranger's collar. "Find Henry," he ordered quietly. "Go!" The dog darted through a side door just as red and blue lights bled across the snow outside. Moments later, the warehouse door burst open. 2 patrol cars skidded to a stop, and out stepped Sheriff Elias Moore, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with a silver mustache and eyes sharp as cold steel. His uniform was immaculate, his badge worn smooth from decades of service. Unlike most of the town's lawmen, Elias carried himself like someone who'd earned respect instead of demanding it. He strode inside, revolver drawn. "Hands where I can see them." Jack lifted his arms slowly, standing in the haze of red smoke. Bobby lay handcuffed at his feet, moaning. Gordy and Tommy were face down, barely conscious. The sheriff took in the scene, eyes narrowing. "You Mercer?" Jack nodded. "The evidence is on the dog, ledger, and confession. Doc Rats are done." Elias exhaled through his nose, holstering his weapon. "You could have come to me first." "I did," Jack said quietly. "You just didn't hear me yet." For a long moment, the 2 men stared at each other. The soldier and the lawman, both worn by duty, both tired of pretending justice, worked the same for everyone. Then Elias gave a slow nod. "We'll make it right." When dawn came, Henry stood at the edge of town beside the sheriff's car, the chest clutched in his hands. His face was drawn, but for the first time in years, the weight behind his eyes had lifted. Ranger sat beside him, fur frosted, tail thumping softly. Jack approached from the pier, coat torn, soot streaked on his cheek. "It's over," he said simply. Henry looked at the horizon, the sun rising over the frozen river, painting the ice in gold. "Maybe now it really can be." For the first time, the old man reached out and gripped Jack's shoulder. "You did more than save my life. You gave me proof there's still good left in this place." Jack smiled faintly. "We both needed that." He crouched, rubbing Ranger's neck. "You did good, buddy." The sheriff walked up, holding a folder. "The DA's already reviewing the evidence. Harlan's under arrest, and you," he looked at Jack, "you should stick around. Men like you make this town better." Jack shook his head. "Men like me only show up when something's broken." The wind rose off the river, scattering the ashes of the burned warehouse into the light. For once, Jack let himself breathe deep. The snow was gone by late March, leaving behind the scent of wet earth and pine sap. The river had awakened, restless beneath the bridge, breaking its ice crust with muffled roars. The air no longer bit. It breathed. The town of Clearwater, once cloaked in gray, had begun to hum again, children shouting near the docks, hammers ringing where silence had lingered. And above it all, the bridge that had once stood broken now stretched whole across the water, its wooden planks new and clean, its scars hidden beneath sunlight. Jack Mercer stood at the end of it, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the workers pack up their tools. His face was thinner now, more lined, but there was peace in the lines, the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd fought his battle and didn't need applause to know he'd won. He wore plain clothes, a worn flannel shirt under a brown jacket, jeans faded at the knees. His hair had grown a little, brushed carelessly back, a faint stubble along his jaw. Ranger sat beside him, tail curled over his paws, his black and tan coat glossy under the morning light. The dog's right ear bore a small nick, a scar from the night of the warehouse fight, but he carried it like a badge. A faint voice called out from across the bridge. "Jack, give me a hand with this, will you?" It was Henry Cole, the old carpenter, though now he looked a little less like a ghost and more like a man reclaimed. His shoulders were still bent with age, but his stride was steadier, his eyes brighter. He wore a thick wool shirt rolled at the sleeves, sawdust in his white beard, and a pencil tucked behind his ear. In the month since the fire, Henry had rebuilt his life piece by piece, quite literally. The Veterans Support Fund had given him a new workshop near the river, and from there he'd begun teaching local kids to carve and sand, just as his father once taught him. Jack crossed the bridge, his boots thudding softly on the new boards. Together, he and Henry lifted a small wooden plaque freshly polished and inscribed with neat, careful letters, "For those who protect without seeking glory." Henry smiled faintly as he ran his calloused fingers over the words. "Think it'll last?" he asked. Jack tilted his head. "You built it. It'll outlast both of us." The old man chuckled, a sound that came easier now. He glanced at Ranger, who was lying near the bridge railing, watching the water. "Your boy there's become a celebrity, you know. Whole town knows his name." Jack smiled. "He handles fame better than I do." And it was true. In the weeks after the arrest of Bobby Kane and the corrupt deputy Harlan, the story had spread through the region like wildfire. The newspapers called Ranger the hero dog of Clearwater. The mayor had even pinned a medal on his collar, K9 Civilian Valor Award. The dog had merely wagged his tail and tried to lick the ribbon. But for Jack, all of it felt distant. The mission was done, and with it came that familiar itch, the restlessness that haunted soldiers after victory. He'd applied to join a national training program for rescue dogs and handlers, teaching other veterans how to work with animals for search and rescue operations. It wasn't war, but it was purpose, and that, he had learned, mattered more. Henry set the plaque in place, hammering the final nail. "You heading out soon?" "Tomorrow," Jack said. "The bus leaves at dawn." "Long way from here," Jack shrugged. "Not far enough to forget." Henry didn't answer right away. He just watched the river glint beneath them. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think justice was something men like Bobby Kane took from the rest of us. But maybe it's something we rebuild, like this bridge. Takes time, takes the right hands." Jack looked at him, then down at those rough, steady hands, the same ones that had held a hammer when the world burned around him, the same that now built toys for children who had never seen a dock fire. "You rebuilt more than this bridge, Henry." The old man gave a tired grin. "Maybe, but I had help." He reached out, patting Ranger's head. The dog leaned into his touch, tail swishing lazily. They stood there for a long moment, 2 men and 1 dog, framed against the morning river. Then the sound of laughter carried from across the bank. A group of children were running toward the workshop, their breath steaming in the cool air. Among them was Lucy Bryant, a freckled girl of about 12, her red hair tied in a loose braid. She was one of Henry's best students, quick with her hands, quicker with her questions. "Mr. Cole," she shouted, "we finished sanding the toy ship. Can we paint it today?" Henry smiled, waving back. "Go on ahead, Lucy. I'll be right there." She grinned, darting off toward the small workshop with the others. The building was simple but sturdy, with large windows that spilled light across rows of workbenches and sawdust-dusted floors. Inside, Colorful birdhouses and wooden toys lined the shelves, painted by tiny hands. Jack watched them go. "You've built yourself a good crew," Henry chuckled. "They remind me that even after a storm, there's something worth teaching, something worth saving." He turned back toward Jack. "You sure you won't stay a while? Clearwater could use someone who still remembers what right looks like." Jack shook his head. "If I stay, I'll just keep waiting for the next fight. I need to learn how to stop looking for one." He crouched beside Ranger, unhooking the metal clasp from the dog's collar. From his pocket, he drew a small, worn seal insignia pin, dulled by years of salt and sand. It was the only piece of his uniform he'd kept. He attached it to the leather strap around Ranger's neck. "There," he murmured, "now you're the one on watch." Ranger gazed at him with those steady amber eyes. As if he understood every word, his tail thumped once, slow and heavy. Henry placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "You taught me something, son. That courage doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it just fixes what's been broken." Jack gave a quiet smile. "And sometimes it just builds bridges." The wind stirred across the river, warm now, carrying the scent of pine and sawdust. In the distance, church bells rang faintly. Noon, marking another day of a town that had chosen to keep living. Jack took one last look at the bridge, at the plaque gleaming in sunlight, at Henry standing tall despite his years, and at Ranger lying calmly by the rail, watching the river like a sentinel. Then he turned toward the road that led out of Clearwater. When he was gone, Henry stood for a while longer, hands resting on the plaque. The river glimmered below, and a single leaf, the first of spring, drifted past, caught in the current. Ranger lifted his head, watching the empty road. His ears flicked once, as though listening for a command that would never come. Then he settled back down beside the bridge, eyes half closed, content. The old man chuckled softly. "Come on, boy, let's go make something that lasts." Together they walked toward the workshop, the bridge standing whole behind them, bright against the thawing sky, a testament to all that could be rebuilt when faith returned. The seal, the shepherd, and the old man by the bridge reminds us that true heroism doesn't always wear a uniform or carry a weapon. Sometimes it's found in small acts of kindness, in rebuilding what's broken, standing up for what's right, and protecting others even when no one is watching. The bridge they rebuilt isn't just wood and nails. It's a symbol of faith, forgiveness, and the strength it takes to start again. In our own lives, we all face storms, moments when the world feels unfair or when it's easier to walk away than to care. But like Jack, Henry, and Ranger, we can choose to rebuild. We can choose compassion over anger, courage over fear, and light over darkness. Each good deed, no matter how small, is a bridge that connects hearts and restores hope in the world. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still matters. Leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from and what courage means to you. And if you believe that love, loyalty, and hope can still change lives, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and join our growing community of storytellers who keep the light alive in every storm.